You're on 94.1 FM, 3WBC, with Jerry Gerges presenting the Egypt Australia Radio Show, a weekly English edition covering local and international news sourced from Australia, Egypt and the Greater Middle East and North Africa region. The program affectionately covers the arts, culture, trade and politics. And now here's Jerry Gerges presenting the Egypt Australia Radio Show, 94.1 FM, 3WBC, the voice of the Inner East.
What can I say except that I got lots of information. I wrote quite a bit. Thank you so much to Dr. Ella Dreyfus. Like I said to our listeners, next week, and thanks for the text message. Next week we'll have Dr. Ella Dreyfus on our show, and we'll have your questions plus tonight's panel, an online panel as well. So we're going to have a lot of people telling us some of the things that they might have come across. But next week will be just one-on-one with Dr. Ella Dreyfus, and I'll channel your questions and some of mine as well to the panel that we have on board tonight. Thanks again for listening and sharing this wonderful film. Thank you so much. And what I was going to say was that there's a lot there. It's moved me tremendously. And can I just start? Who wants to say something first? You don't have to go in any particular order. Mm-hmm. What comes to mind to any of you guys? Could I just? What I'll do, I'll just lead you. Let me just go over some of the things that I wrote down that might help your thoughts along the lines. Okay, so Dr. Ella Dreyfus, of course, the artist who compiled the film. Her dad, Richard, who was married to Dora Hart, I think. So her father and her uncle, George, they were the only two kids allowed to come, two of the 17 that came to Australia. So in 1939, Ella's grandfather Alfred and Hilda spent quite a bit of money sending their two kids to Australia because there was a what they called a kinder transport. In understanding that, in June in 39, that's when the Richard, so Ella's father, Richard, and her uncle George left Germany to come to Australia on this kinder transport scheme, where they were actually in an orphanage in Australia. Only 17 Jewish kids came to Australia in 1939, or they got visas to come to Australia. I also understand 10,000 compared to 17. 10,000 went to the UK. That's what the first thing that struck me was the difference in numbers between 17 who were granted visas to Australia, as opposed to 10,000 to the UK. That's one thing. The other thing I wrote down was the documentary. It talks about when the documentary reflects how Richard, Ella's dad, felt. He had no love for Germany. He didn't want to talk about anything about Germany. No feelings at all. On the other hand, Richard was reflecting of saying, well, I'm not saying anything about the people who are today descendants of that society, and that's, I'm just moving on with my life. I've moved on as a composer, and his son Jonathan's in Berlin as an artist, as well as a musician. The point about the passport, that's a big thing. The point about Dr. Ella saying, wanting her father's permission. You know, he's passed away, but in the movies that she reflects, when she plays the video video of her father, and she says that there's a picture of my dad looking back at me and smiling, and that was like, he's approved of what I've done. So there's that. It's really like multi-layered. The passport that's been granted to Jews, that's another issue. If I was to remember, there was one time when I did actually had the chance to speak to an Egyptian Jew, and mind you, there was 80,000 Jews in Egypt at one stage. 80,000 Egyptian Jews were in Egypt at one stage. So, and her story, which is Egyptian Jewish immigrants in Australia, talks about the same thing. And the book that's what it was titled. Speaking to Rashleen Barter about her book, and whether a passport would give her permission to go back, and her husband's, Joe, to go back to Egypt. And I think they've done that. But a passport, what does a passport mean, if it does mean anything? The reconnection, the return, one side of the family where the George side of the family were happy to go back and revisit and get on with whatever, where Ella's dad just refused to talk about it. Different personalities, different characters, different profiles. Sorry, I just wanted to reflect on some of my notes.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was probably with Richard, was he an older brother, or were they the same? It doesn't really say that, does it? But
well,
nevertheless,
that's a good. I don't know.
I feel like he had a lot of resentment, being taken away from his country, his family, and he thought, if they're throwing me out, I never want to come back here again, kind of thing.
Yep.
And the brother George seemed to have a lot of anger towards his brother.
Oh yes, I saw that.
Because he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't sort of want to reason that this, even though we were kicked out, this is our home still. This is where we're from. This is who we are.
Weren't they twins?
Oh, were they twins?
No, they weren't twins.
Who were the twins?
Twins were
The
from
twins-
the other.
The twins were
sorry,
between.
wrong
So there was George.
George's children, I think, might have been twins. They
No,
were
no,
twins.
George was a twin as well. Yeah, because they talked about a twin.
Yeah.
I think there was a first and second marriage
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
He was married twice. Wasn't George married twice, or was Alfred?
But aside from that,
No, George was
regardless of
married.
these are the two different ways the brother had become. One had become almost like accepting this is his country. He wanted to know his heritage. He still wanted to know where he was from. Richard, on the other hand, had this resentment of being, and then again guilt when he came to Australia and his parents come to collect him from the orphanage. There was guilt there that he was being taken away from these other children when these children had nothing. So again, he was removed from a place where he finally maybe felt safe.
Yeah.
So it's this is regardless, I think, of, like you said, religion, race or whatever, how a mind can work.
Yep.
Like you can take, even with illness, one can take, all doom and gloom, and another person can say, I can beat this,
Yep.
That kind of resonates with these two people.
Yep.
One wants to accept and get back to where he was really from, and the other had total resentment and anger. He just didn't want to acknowledge he's been thrown out of that country, and I'm never going to talk about it, and I'm never going back.
That's a very good point, a comparison between the two brothers. I just wanted, did you have a feeling where Dr. Ella Dreyfus was?
Well, with her, I just think she was just really curious and she wanted to know her heritage. She didn't want to upset her father. She wanted to remain sort of neutral while her father was alive.
Yep.
And just kind of went with the flow. But deep down inside, she had this real curiosity of finding out, I need to go back, this is where we're from. And
The faithful daughter.
Yes, yeah, very. So, yes, very different, very patient.
Well, I also saw a lot of, bit similar to Rosa, but words came to me during that documentary of trust, abandonment, approval, betrayal. Also, you wonder whether there was trauma, post-traumatic trauma that we now know about through the abandonment of him and his brother to Australia by his parents, and once again repeated when they were in the orphanage. He was abandoning his the fellow
children.
Jewish children that he came out with. There might have been an association there. And also, as Rosa said, guilt, betrayal. His wife, Dora, didn't want to betray his trust in divulging about his family. It was up to him to do that. If he wanted to talk about his life in Germany with his family, it was his choice, and trust, and also trust in a marriage, a relationship, and also with the daughter, it's sort of the parent. It doesn't matter how old you are. You're as a child, you always respect your parent. You don't question. You're accepting, and it's that parent-child relationship. And that betrayal, once again, she didn't want to betray her father's trust in her by keep on asking about, his background. And a lot of people I've worked with, I personally have worked with as a nurse with Holocaust survivors, and exactly the difference between the way George has coped with the whole situation of the Holocaust and leaving family, home, and people being exposed, to the gas chambers, etc., and family members. There are parts of the community that acknowledge it and sort of move on with their life here, and there's also others that, and very positively as well, that this is their new land, this is their country. As George said, when he goes back, he has no connection with it because this was in Australia was their new life, opposed to Richard, who just blocked everything else and internalised everything. And that seems to be, from my experience, working with Holocaust survivors, that seems to be, two sides of the coin, how people deal with the situation that they were confronted with.
That's very good, Jared. Michael?
The number of children that came to Australia, 17 and 10,000 to UK, is that any significance to the whole story?
It's an element of the story.
Is this part of their story?
Well, don't forget, back then there was the white policy, Australian policy.
Yeah.
So,
is it because of the distance, or?
Well, I all I could say was that Australia only granted
or
17.
Possibly the significance of that is that if those 17 remained with the other 10,000, there might have been more, because they have no other family, there might have been more people known to them. They were separated again from a group of people that they were all with. And only 17, like a handful.
That was their community.
Yeah. And those 10,000 were their community. They were people together again, in the same boat, with the same situation of why they were removed from Germany, and then 17 segregated from that group again could have also been something that was hurtful in their life. On the other hand, too, did they feel like sorry, Michael, I'm taking over from you. That did they feel also anger that more children they had a better life to go to, and again they felt guilt. Sorry, Michael.
Go on, Janet.
And were they only 17 that came out under that?
Visas. There were refugee visas back then.
But
that's all Australia granted.
Full stop.
Stop.
Not 17 as a group that came out collectively.
No.
Because were there other
individually?
Were there other families that brought children out as well?
Well,
but they're the ones that were put into orphanages.
Well, okay. Let me just explain that bit, which is very critical. To the best of my knowledge. So in I just wrote down, I didn't write the gentleman's name because I couldn't get the right name. So in 1936, flags were raised about what to come. Things are going to happen. And this particular person, and I do apologise, I didn't get his name properly, went and spoke to Alfred and Hilda, which is Ella's grandparents, George's father and mother, and Richard's father and mother. So this person who Ramsenberg, he went and spoke to Alfred and Hilda, and he said, look, this is what's going to happen. So Alfred and Hilda got their monies together, and they shipped George and Richard part of this kinder transport scheme, and Australia only granted 17 visas, Michael.
What was the reason for that? Like, it couldn't have been the White Australia policy.
Well, I don't know why 17 only was granted. It could have been 100,000, but they didn't.
Will the documentary explain this? No.
We can always ask more a little bit about that, but this is how it was. This is what Australia was. It's like stop the boat. We're not going to bring more of these refugees. I don't really know.
Maybe that's a question we can ask next
Dr.
week.
Dr. Ella.
Yes,
absolutely. I did want to make the point that the Jewish community were in Germany 1,700 years. In Germany, so there was Jewish communities in Germany about 300 AD. So there've been Jewish communities in Germany for 1,700 years, 1,700 years. So, like I said, 300 AD, there's evidence of Jewish communities there. So the Jewish community, or Alfred and Hilda, Ella's grandparent, knew of Jewish communities in Australia, and hence they paid to send their kids, George and Richard, to Australia.
So who did they pay this money to?
Well,
the German government.
No,
the Australian.
Well, the parents would have paid for the application
that was part of the visa.
Yeah, part of the visas to get the kids, and do all the papers and documentation, and organise, supporting the orphanages that are being, in Melbourne or Sydney or.
It would be interesting to find out more about the orphanage and whether there was any follow-up with the others that were left, and did they ever reconnect with family members that may have been, or relatives that may have been here in Australia, or whether they had to make it on their own back, sort of thing, or did they reconnect with? Were they taken in by other, families, Jewish families that might have been located here? if they didn't reconnect with.
In the film, I just heard that these 17 kids in an orphanage, when Alfred and Hilda came, and they joined the two kids, and it was a little bit hard for the rest of the kids because there's a parent. You know, your parents are here, and they only stayed in that particular orphanage, I think, for 6 months. I think that was it.
And also they wouldn't have known what had happened to their parents, whether they were still alive or not, because, you know, if the war was coming, and did they disperse and did they lose contact altogether, you know, forever? Or
well, the other thing is, in the documentary, Dr. Ella Dreyfus talks about, so not her dad, Richard and her uncle George, not about Alfred and Hilda, that the grandparents. She talks about the other Ravensburg, which is Hilda's parents. They were sent to the concentration camp in 1942. So that we know that link, because they stayed, of course. That's Hilda. So that's Ella's grandmother, parent. Great mother. So this. Thanks for the. I've got more questions. I did want to talk about. You talked about quite a bit about reconnecting and return to family home. Good points about the children-parent relationship, and it's, you know, that's. I just wanted to see if there was anything else about the documentary. Can I just move to the question of how did it feel, how successful was listening to the audio, not watching the video, because we didn't.
No. It was quite powerful, Jerry, just listening to the story. And I also want to comment on the music that accompanied the audio, which was quite moving and reflective of, obviously, the situation. So I was just wondering, did the family compose that music? You know,
I believe it was a lot of from George.
Yes.
So the Uncle George, he's the composer, and I'm sure
his son,
Jonathan.
Yes,
his son is also a part of that. The notes were going a bit fast. I wouldn't have been able to watch it. We can ask more, but yes,
it's just interesting because it was, you know, it was all, for me, it sort of really connected and was reflective of the commentary and of the in the documentary.
Yeah, but you probably need the vision to sort of complete the whole story.
I was thinking.
I quite enjoyed listening to the story, and you kind of like try to visualise more of what it was like. And she didn't give you too much information where you strayed and got bored from listening to it. It was just she held you captive all the way through the documentary.
What about the tone, the strength, and the spread of George's voice? How did that come across? Because
sorry. Okay. That's what I thought the anger was in his voice, because he was angry at his brother for not wanting to talk about it, because he obviously wanted to talk about it, and he didn't want to talk about his brother. Can't mention him because it's almost like it's too late now. Too painful, and we can't get answers now. He's not here.
But I also saw, you know, George as being quite definite about that, and once again was a betrayal of his brother's secrets. You know, that was his business. Why are you asking me? Leave me alone. It's his life. I don't have his answers, and don't make me
accountable for his answers.
Yeah, accountable. Or it's, you know, we're brothers. It's that brother trust, blood brothers. You know, we don't push me on that one, because that's not me. That's him, and that's my love for my brother. And I think it's quite a bit of a mixed emotion in saying so, because he's also protecting his brother. So that brings it back to the question that Rosa, who was the older in that relationship, and whether that played a part of it, whether he was the younger brother who respected his older brother's decision. And once again, it's about betrayal. You know, Dora didn't want to betray her husband because it was his. If he chooses to do it, she didn't want to tell his story. He needed to tell his own story, and the pain it might have brought them, and the pain it might have brought George too, by trying to justify his brother.
I just wanted to go back and reflect on what I tried to set out with this documentary film, short film on radio, in that we wanted to take out the groups out of the documentary, and we're talking about a lot of the things that each of the panel has reflected on, not being that specific identity, not that specific religion, but it's all about relationship. Michael?
I just think that if I see it, it'll be better for me. You know, it's a visual documentary.
Yes.
You know, you're sort of just hearing it makes an impression, but it's a visual documentary.
Could I just to add to that, Michael, what about if we have, and I wrote this down, and I'm going to ask Ella next week if she would be able to do a little bit of that with a voiceover, so that the bits that we don't see, someone is doing a voiceover as describing what is going on. Maybe like would that help?
There's missing pieces.
Yeah.
You know.
You get, obviously, when you watch the documentary, you get the full imagery.
Yeah.
And that accounts for bringing it all together. However, it was still quite a powerful piece. I
do want to thank the panel. Thank you very much. And I want to thank a couple of the text messages that came through as well. So thank you. One of them was quite precise about the questions, and I will include some of those questions next week as well. Thank you for George from Box Hill, I think. Yeah. Thank you so much. Look, thank you, Rosa, Janet, Michael, and thank you to all those who have been listening. Make sure you tuned in next week, same time, same station, same segment. So next week, 7 o'clock sharp, I'll have Dr. Ella.